This episode of Wheat Pete's Word is brought to you by Syngenta. Growing wheat in Western Canada, Miravis Era fungicide for fusarium combines two active ingredients and sets a higher standard for disease protection. And with Miravis Era, you're also getting excellent control of late-season leaf diseases. Visit syngenta.ca for more information.
Good day, and welcome to Wheat Pete's Word here on Real Agriculture for Wednesday, July the 9th. On this episode of the Word, not much preamble. I haven't had time to check out cool stuff. You guys haven't been sending me cool stuff, and so not much preamble. Paul will be happy. We're going to quickly get into agronomy. Let's go! Okay, so Pete got to host the agronomists on Monday night. What a blast. That's Lindsay's role, she's much better at than I am. But targeted broadcast spraying, so the see and spray technology, green on green, green on brown, and that's what we were talking about. We had Rodrigo Worley and Zayam Uglich from the University of Wisconsin-Madison. Zayam's doing his PhD on that specific topic, and he showed some brand new data. Also had Tom Wolfe. Tom is just such an icon in that industry, but brand new data that is just blow your mind. It was an epic episode. If you're interested at all in how that technology might apply to your farm, I really encourage you to watch that episode. We'll link it in the post, but it was way cool. Meanwhile, the weather out there, for the most part, it's dry. It's not dry everywhere. There's a few places that are getting some very heavy thunderstorms, but it's dry, and that means that we're starting to see drought stress. And so my good friend Nature Nut Nick from Strathroy saying that, hey, Pete, we had a warm June. That's not a surprise, man. At June 19th, she just went sweltering. So 740 crop heat units versus the 10-year average at 683. So about 60 more, almost 10% above the 10-year average heat accumulation. Nick said he got 84 millimeters of rainfall in June. It's way more than a lot of people. Gord's saying no rain since June the 3rd, and that's going to affect Gord's nitrogen rate on his corn. We'll get to that. But Nick's saying, and the corn clearly cannot find enough moisture at these temperatures to keep itself out of drought stress symptoms. And Brett's asking the same question. It's 32 degrees. This was when he sent me the text. It's 32 degrees. My corn is starting to leaf roll. I talked to Barry today. He's also on the compacted headlands seeing some leaf roll. And it just, man, is that permanent? Is that yield loss? So we are getting close to the critical period for corn. It's 10 days prior to tasseling. And we're not likely quite 10 days away in most places, but July 9th, we're getting very close. What happens is that the hotter the temperature gets, the corn plant or the soybean plant or the wheat plant, any crop, has to transpire more moisture to keep itself cool. It needs water in the photosynthetic process as well. That's where the hydrogen comes from to make the carbohydrate that is photosynthate that we turn into food. But part of transpiration is to cool the plant, just like you go outside and sweat. The higher the temperature, the more you sweat. The higher the temperature, the more water that plant needs to cool itself. And when you get really high temperatures, the water just can't get into the corn plant through the roots, or through to any plant for that matter, through the roots, and cool it enough, and then it goes into those drought stress symptoms. The beauty is it's cooler now. We're seeing less of those drought stress symptoms, but for the places that are dry, we still need rain. Please bring the rain on fairly soon. We're not as bad, by the way, as parts of Saskatchewan, for example. That Palliser Triangle down from Kindersley down towards Alberta. Boy, she is fiercely dry there. No growth on the pastures. So yeah, it's dry in Ontario, but we have no concept of what dry is compared to Western Canada. All right, meanwhile, Of course, right on schedule, my great friend Albert Tenuta, the provincial pathologist here in Ontario, Tarspot, shows up July the 6th at Rodney. And you go, so what does that mean? Well, 2025 at this point is not as high a risk for Tarspot as 2024 was. It's quite a piece to go before we have to make that spray decision on about the R2, R1, R2 stage, green silk for Dawn, R1 for Tarspot typically. But it's been drier, and drier means lower risk. So when Albert presented at Diagnostic Days on yesterday, Tuesday, the Tarspot risk, 40% is the threshold. At Rodney, it was below that threshold. At Ridgetown, it was below that threshold. And, of course, Albert knew Wheat Pete was going to be there. So, yeah, he pulled up the Lucan numbers. And guess what? Lucan was at 43%. So it's over the threshold. So if you want to kind of track that whole thought process, you can use the Tarspotter app. It's available on the Crop Pest website. We'll link it. But right now, if you're super dry, your Tarspot risk is definitely dropping. Doesn't go to zero, but it's dropping. Whereas if you're in those wet zones, you're getting that 7 hours of leaf wetness. That's really the critical point. Walk out in there in that cornfield at 8 in the morning. If it's dry, you're in good shape. If it's wet, yeah, you do have risk. Meanwhile, we're continuing with the harvest, and that's awesome. Some excellent winter barley yields, better than we anticipated. Most winter barley yields coming in between 135 and 175 bushels per acre. Now, there's always the outliers. We had some winter barley fields that were just hammered with the barley yellow dwarf virus. My friend Chad in the breadbasket, South Lambton County, 80 bushel per acre winter barley, where it was really, really heavily impacted by barley yellow dwarf virus. And a lot of growers with good yields, 150, 160, but those fields had heavy barley yellow dwarf virus pressure, and it did take the top end yield potential off. Where we didn't have as much pressure, we are getting some excellent yields into the 170 levels. So make solid yields, no question about that. Winter wheat yields also very solid, but here is the alert, alert, alert. Many of the winter barley crops that we've harvested have been low test weight. A lot of the winter wheat harvested has been very borderline in terms of test weight. It's not heavy. So getting numbers back at 362 grams per half liter, 374 grams per half liter. And it's probably the heat that just we did not fill as much of the kernel as we wanted to. We didn't pack the photosynthate, the starch, into those wheat kernels, those barley kernels, the way we wanted to. We shortened grain fill because it was hot at the end. At the end of the day, though, the cutoff for grade 2 wheat is 360 grams per half liter. If you're at a 362, one rainstorm, you could be in trouble. So we lose 1 pound per bushel in test weight for every rain. And you say, well, how does that relate to grams per half liter? So that's about 6.4 grams per half liter. If you're delivering at 365 test weight and you get one rain, now you lose 6, you're now at 359. That's below 360, you're a grade 3. If you're lucky and you're at 374, you get 2 rains and you are really close to that line. So whatever you do, get out there and harvest that wheat as absolutely quickly as you can, because it's not a high test weight year from what we can tell up until this point. Now, I hope that I'm wrong. I hope that lots of producers say, wait a minute, we're at harvest and it's 380, it's 400, it's 420. Some years we get into the 420 category. Not this year. The upside is that falling number so far looks to be very solid. We did have trouble with that last year, so that's a good thing. One last quick note on this. Lots of growers looking at the wheat field saying, oh, man, the wheat field is variable. We really want to try to speed it up and get it harvested and not suffer the quality losses that Johnson just talked about. and they're going out there and they're pre-harvesting it. But some growers are pre-harvesting their wheat crop with Aragon. Aragon has virtually no impact on grasses, and it doesn't matter if we're trying to burn down grass weeds in an edible bean crop or we're trying to speed harvest in a wheat crop, it doesn't work on grasses. So if you are going to pre-harvest your wheat crop, we linked a video on the weekend in Twitter, and it's up on our website. You can look at it, but it really does come down to the peduncle color change and glyphosate, and that is the product that is going to actually do something in terms of drying up that wheat crop. I don't understand where this concept comes from of pre-harvesting with Aragon. It simply does not have grass activity. Hey, there are some awesome wheat yields out there, or some awesome wheat crops. Frederick from Denmark sending a picture on Twitter of a wheat head that was 24 spikelets long by 5 kernels per spikelet. And man, if you do that math at 10,000 seeds per pound, that gets you up close to 600 bushels per acre. So not every head was like that for Frederick, and I don't know his actual head count per square foot or per square meter, but wowzers, that was one big wheat head. So that was just a bit of fun. Hey, some other really interesting things that are out there. We are seeing very poor edible bean stands in many fields. The heavy rains in June just beat us up like crazy. And when we get into those areas with heavy rains, I scouted cornfields in Bruce County on Friday, and it's hummocky. So it's got little hills and little hollows. And those little hollows, it's tile drained, and it's not a big surface area that runs water into that hollow. But I had 2-foot-high, knee-high corn with mud right to the top because a heavy rainstorm, heavy thunderstorm, and it ponded in that hollow long enough that we got the water right up over the corn plants. That will be really interesting to see how much crazy top we get out of that. That's a disease that the corn crop gets when it gets those waterlogged and underwater conditions, that it's in the soil, it gets into the whirl, and we get that into the corn plant. I'm not saying it'll be a huge problem, but it is kind of an interesting thing that is probably going to happen out there. We are soybean aphids. Just as an update, because we've talked about them, they're still out there. I'm finding them in more and more fields, but for the most part, they are remaining at low levels. So again, we have to scout. They like dry conditions. They don't like humidity or high temperatures. So this week is pretty good for soybean aphids to continue to increase populations. The beauty of it is that there's lots of beneficial predators out there. There's ladybugs, there's damselbugs, there's syrphid flies, and they do seem to be keeping them in check. But slow increase is where we would say from that perspective. Lots of leaf burn in corn. All you people out there side dressing your corn with urea. I hate to see the burn. I know we say it doesn't cause yield loss, just like we say that 28% on wheat doesn't cause yield loss. Pete hates burn, man. So one of the tricks that is seeming to reduce the burn is if you stabilize that urea, you put a nitrogen stabilizer on it so that it doesn't transform to ammonia as quickly. It does seem to be reducing the leaf burn. You might be spending the money and not getting any of that yield, but at least Pete's happy because you did not burn the corn crop nearly as much. Lots of volunteer soybeans and even some volunteer edible beans showing up in fields this year. So in particular, this is one of the reasons why if you're going to grow IP soybeans, you should not grow second-year soybeans when the first-year soybeans were Roundup Readies. We are actually seeing some volunteer Roundup Ready soybeans showing up in IP soybeans this year. There's no way to take them out. And what it shows you is what a mild winter we had underneath the snow. It was a harsh winter above the snow, but we had that blanket of snow. And how many times does Pete say, I've seen white beans? Yes, white beans volunteer. That just never happens. And as well, the stripe rust that overwintered. So that blanket of snow has changed a few things. The edible beans are easy to control. The volunteer soys, that is not such a great thing to have. We do have some fusarium out there. So as we move further north, in the deep southwest, we saw a bit of fusarium in the wheat crop. So far, the reports are of almost undetectable DON levels, toxin levels in the wheat crop. That's all good. As we move north, the temperatures did not get as hot through that critical period, and we are seeing some levels of fusarium that are a little bit higher than we'd like. So get out there, look at your fields. Again, this is a harvest timely, keep the wind blast up. We can deal with it, but there are some higher rates of fusarium out there than what we actually really expected. One last quick note just before we move on. Gord saying, okay, Peter, it hasn't rained since June the 3rd. My corn crop, the roots are a bit squirrely because it was wet enough when we planted, but it was June 3rd. We wanted to get it in the ground, and no rain since. I'm side dressing my corn. I was targeting 180 of total nitrogen, at least 160. What's the thought process? Well, the work is very clear from University of Guelph, Josh Naselski, Bill Dean's work, and Caleb Niemeyer was the other person that drove that data. When you get dry conditions, your yield potential is lower. And so go to the calculator, put in a more realistic, I don't think, Gord, you have a 200 bushel yield potential. I think 160 is much more realistic. Put that in the calculator, figure out that second nitrogen application. But the smart grower is going to reduce their nitrogen application in that scenario, because no rain means no grain, and no one knows that better than Western Canada. All right, Chad in the deep southwest talking about winter barley silage, and that the double crop soybeans, they've had 2 rains. It looks like that's going to be a huge winter. What I find really interesting is that in Chad's area, it's the beef farmers that have fallen in love with winter barley silage. And I go, wow, I go to Alberta and they grow barley for silage, and they could grow oats for silage, they could grow wheat for silage, but they grow barley for silage, and that's what seems to work the best. In Chad's case, I've often said, Chad, why wouldn't you grow rye? Why wouldn't you grow triticale? No, winter barley, there's got to be something about the palatability. Winter barley comes off later, but regardless, the yields have been great, and they are back into double crop soybeans. That looks like a win this year. On that note, Jim sending me a picture of an oat pea combination underseeded to alfalfa, and the oats are just right full of rust. And the downside there is no toxins in crown rust in oat. It will be crown rust in that oat crop. There's no toxins. It will reduce the yield. But the real downside, and I was not aware of this, but the dairy farmers are telling me that if you get a lot of rust in that oat cover crop, in that oat pea that's going for alfalfa, underseeded alfalfa, the cows don't like it. The dust in it, or maybe there's a taste, I don't know, not a toxin issue, but they just don't want to eat it. So from that perspective, you're going to use the oat pea mix to underseed alfalfa? Man, I think we have to start looking at controlling the rust in that oat crop if we actually want good feed out of it. All right, Bobby saying, okay, Peter, what's the value of straw? Man, I get that question a lot. So at today's current prices, the value of straw is 0.67, 2/3 of a cent per pound in the straw that you remove. If we add the nitrogen and sulfur, so 2/3 of a cent in the PK, if we add nitrogen and sulfur, we can argue about whether you should do that or not, but it's about 1.25 cents a pound. And of course, that's using today's prices. Things can always change. But man, if you are not getting at least double the nutrient value, so if it's 1.25 cents, if you aren't getting 2.5 cents a pound for straw, blow it back in the field. Straw prices seem to be down this year, but and I'm not setting the straw price because that's a really, really localized thing. But there are growers who are just telling me, Pete, come on, the economics on wheat is horrible. So we're selling the straw, and we'll take less because we got to make something out of it to get the economics back. And I just hit my head and say, oh my gosh, yeah. In any case, we'll move on. Steve sending me some pictures of Cephalosporium stripe in his wheat, saying, okay, Pete, like, I've had it 6 years ago. I had it 3 years ago. I just, is there anything I can do? Do I have to lengthen my rotation? I'm in a corn, soybean, wheat rotation. So, Steve, I wonder how much it's hurting your yield. I know you get the little round patches that does hurt your yield, but is it 1% of the field? Is it 5% of the field? Here's some things to look for. Cephalosporium infects in the fall. It's a fungal disease that affects through the roots. And so variety is number one. There are more resistant varieties, but we don't test for it. You'll have to go to your seed supplier to see if they have something better. Don't plant quite as early. I know Pete always says plant early. Don't plant quite as early. Look at your pH. Cephalosporium stripe, generally worse with low pH. And anything you can do to make that crop healthier. Cephalosporium stripe loves wet soil conditions. If you can drain it better, if you can feed it a little better with phosphorus in the fall, try to make it be able to resist that cephalosporium stripe. That will help. Okay, I want to finish up on potash deficiency because I was scouting in Bruce County on the soybeans. I saw lots of potash deficiency. William from Quebec saying, okay, Pete, my soybeans are growing awesome, adding a new trifoliate every 2 to 3 days. Last time I had soybeans in that field, I think we went potash deficient. I'm thinking about foliar feeding them with the drone to try and keep them going and not have any deficiency. Whoa, wait a minute. Okay, trying to foliar feed a macronutrient like potash is almost impossible. William sent me his soil test. That field is low potash. Get out there and broadcast 100 pounds of product, 60 pounds of actual potash. Horst would say 117 pounds of product, that's removal on a 60 bushel crop. Fair enough. Go to that level. That was my recommendation. Paul, get out there and broadcast some potash on those deficient soys. And William also saying, so, I send away some tissue tests and I get back these recommendations. There's people that use algorithms to say, well, if this level is that and that level is this, then you need to add this. Oh, come on, people. When it comes to tissue tests, they are a great tool, but we do not have response data with those tissue test that says if your tissue test on magnesium is X and potash is Y and zinc is Z, that based on that you need to add whatever. They just don't exist. It's all smoke and mirrors. I don't buy it for a second. If you think you're going to have potash deficiency, if you do have potash deficiency, the best thing you can do is go broadcast some dry potash before those soybeans get too big. And last on that quick note, Dr. Dave sending me a link with an agronomist who is talking about foliar feeding crops, saying, come on, you've been doing it wrong all along, and you actually want to get a super fine spray, 40 to 60 micron droplets. Oh, man, if you have any wind at all, that stuff's landing in your neighbor's field, not in your field. In fact, with the agronomist session that we did on Monday night, they had some awesome data there. And get this, if you have a fine spray and you have zero wind, they were getting 64% coverage. They applied a 6 mile an hour, 10 kilometer an hour wind, which is no wind at all. Come on, people, we spray with way more than that all the time. With that fine spray, which is 100 to 200 microns, if I recall correctly, not 40 to 60 microns, they went from 64% coverage to 30% coverage, less than half the coverage just with that slight wind. It's a really interesting adventure to think through that thought process. But in any case, I don't buy it. Use foliars for micros and play around, do the plots. But man, if you have potash deficiency, it's dry potash. Have a nice day. And with that, that's it. That's all. On behalf of the team here at Real Agriculture, this is Wheat Pete with the word for Wednesday, July the 9th. Hey, keep the questions, the comments coming. Keep the arguments coming. You don't have to agree with me. I actually like that the best. And I will talk again next week, which apparently will once again be way too long, just like this week was. See you then.
Thank you for listening to this episode of Wheat Pete's Word, brought to you by Syngenta. Miravis Era fungicide sets a higher standard for Western cereal disease protection with 2 powerhouse active ingredients for fusarium, head blight, and late-season leaf diseases. Make this your golden era with Miravis Era and earn Western Partner Program rewards on qualifying purchases. Visit syngenta.ca/partner program to calculate your rewards today.